So let me introduce the panel quickly and lay out just, a couple of things. First of all, as you all know, this is our panel on South Korean cultural influence in Southeast Asia. And I sort of, came up with this idea because we really wanted to do something that was, more international than we usually do, and to have a few speakers who can give a perspective on Korea that's a little bit different from what we usually get in Washington. We have plenty of Korean speakers who come and speak about Korea and plenty of American speakers, but Korea is so influential now in Southeast Asia and South Asia that I was really curious to get a perspective from some people from South and Southeast Asia. And so I found three excellent speakers tonight who were highly recommended by some of my friends in Korean studies and also very excellent commentators. So I'm going to introduce them briefly, and then they're going to be speaking. Each of the speakers will talk for about 15 to 20 minutes. Our first speaker is Professor Nguyen Hee Hien, and she is a professor of Korean studies at the Vietnam National University in Ho Chi Minh City. She is also the editor-in-chief of the Vietnamese localization of Koreana Quarterly. And she is, among other things, the author of Shanghai, Tokyo, Hanoi, Seoul in East Asian Literature and the Beginning of the 20th Century. And she has translated a number of Korean books into Vietnamese. Second, we are going to have from Thailand, Professor Kamon Butsaban, and he is currently a faculty member at the Faculty of Arts at Chulalongkorn University, and he has actually served as the head of the Korean section and the secretary of the MA in Korean Studies program at the Graduate School of Chulalongkorn University. His fields of research are in Korean studies with particular interests in Korean society and culture, Korea's soft power. I actually had seen one of his papers about Lisa from Blackpink, and I said, well, this is an interesting guy. We have to invite him. And finally, we'll have Professor La Di Tan. He is a full-time lecturer at the University of Social Sciences and the Humanities at Vietnam National University in Ho Chi Minh City. He graduated from there with a major in Oriental Studies and continued his higher education in South Korea between 2010 and 2018. He actually focused on modern Korean history at the Academy of Korean Studies, or AKS, which is also a very generous partner of the Korea Institute. Finally, as a commentator, I'm very happy to introduce my colleague, Professor Shawn McHale, who is an associate professor of history in the history department and the Elliott School. And very excitingly, he has a forthcoming book with Cambridge University Press that's going to appear in August of 2021. So I encourage you to keep your eyes peeled on Amazon, to buy it. He is also my fellow member of the Pandemic Self-Haircut Club for Men. We both cut our own hair during the pandemic. And, I think we look pretty neat considering that, we both were trained as historians and not barbers. So with that having been said, I want to turn things over to Professor Nguyen.
Thank you. Today I will talk about the history of literature exchange between Korea and Vietnam. And because my college, Professor La Duy Tân will focus on the economic relation. So now I will focus just only on the literature exchange. Yes, everyone, as you know, Korea and Vietnam belong to the East Asia. So, and our two countries share many similarities in culture and history. And exchange between the two countries began from the 12th century. Is the picture you can see from the 12th century and the 3rd century. At that time, the prince of the Ly dynasty in Vietnam, Ly Giang-Con and Ly Yong-san, they left Vietnam to avoid the political turmoil, and after that they settled in the Korean peninsula. So the descendant of Vietnam, now we call Cheongshan Isi. Cheongshan Isi is in Gyeongju. And Hwasan Isi. Hwasan now is in the North Korea. They are the descendants of Vietnam. And with the increase of multicultural families, the relationship between Korea and Vietnam can be reset. The very tight relationship we call the 사돈 관계, the relationship in marriage or the marriage. And since the 1990, the sentence of Korean countries have been increasing in Vietnam due to the influence of the Korean wave we call Hallyu, from drama to K-pop, to Korean product and Korean language, Korean literature. And now every Vietnam people, they accept the Korean culture now. Recently, the Vietnamese football team under the guidance of the coach Park Hang-seo, you know Park Hang-seo? Yeah, they're very famous now in Vietnam. The football team has achieved a great success in history, so the image of Korean in Vietnam is more, more better. It's very friendly now. So now we'll tell about I will tell you about the strain of literature between Korea and Vietnam by period. From the 14th century, Vietnam and Korea has a trend literature between two countries involved in China. As the documentary I researched, there are 19 types of literary exchange between Vietnam and Joseon, Korea and Joseon invoice from the first in the 1460 and the last in the 1913. The Hanoi Study Collaboration, the Hanoi Institute in Vietnam, in collaboration with the Center of Korean Study in Han University in Korea, they translated and published the Vietnamese Korean Envoy chorus poem. Is the picture you can see that the book they published. And in the 19th century, Vietnam and Korea become the colonizers of Japan, and Vietnam is under the rule of France. So in the same colonial situation, Korean Vietnam's intellectual, they say the sense of solidarity. So the Phan Bội Châu, who he is a pioneer of Vietnamese in the early 20th century. His book is History of the Loss of Vietnam, Vietnam Vong Quốc Sử. This book was translated into Korean several times in Hangul and Chinese translation of Hyun Che, Chu Shi-kyung, and also Lee Sang-it. On the other hand, Kim Yong-gun is a Joseon scholar. He came to Hanoi. He came to Hanoi in 1931, and he worked in the Fries Institute in Hanoi. At that time, he studied about Vietnam and wrote some paper on Vietnam. After return to Japan, not Joseon, Japan, they continued to study about the Vietnam study and wrote two books related to Vietnam, as you say that. And during the period in the wartime, Korean troops participate in Vietnam War. And in that time, Vietnamese literature were introduced and translated into Korea by the Korean writer and also Korean soldier. And you can see on the left is the book Far Away by River by the Park Young-han, and on the right is the Shadow of Arms of the Hwang Seok-young. They two writers show the nature of the war because they participated in the Vietnam War. And on the other hand, the sorrow of war of Bao Ninh a very famous writer in Vietnam. He also participated on the Vietnam War, and his book, The Shorter of Wars, has been translated into Korean. Before 1992, 1992, the exchange between Korea and Vietnam were very limited because the war, afterward, you know. So after Hankuk University of Foreign Study in Korean, they opened Vietnamese language course in 1967, and from that time, Vietnam literature were translated and researched by them, and they also translated many books into Korea. Now I will talk about Vietnam and Korea literature exchange since 1992. So since 1992, Korea and Vietnam began diplomatic relationship, and 2 years later, the first book were translated and published. This book is Chulalongkorn, the classic, very famous classic of Korean literature. From 1994 to 2003, only 4 books were translated. But now you can see that. Now there are more than 100 books. Korean literature books were translated and published in Vietnam because the support of 한국 문학 번역원, LTI in Korea, and AKS, 한국학중앙연구원 support, and also Korea Foundation, 한국국제교류수단의 support. They support our scholar and also Korean scholar to translate Korean literature book into Vietnamese and public in here. And the research literature in Vietnam, we have 2 centers in Vietnam, leading role in Korean study. One we call the Korean Research Association Vietnam, KRVA, and one it has a Center of Korean Study in Vietnam, in Academy of Social Science. And now research in Vietnam from most of research related to Korean language, and now scholars in Vietnam, they research about the Korean language, Korean economy, Korean culture, Korean politics also, but study on Korean economy, culture, and society is more important than Korean literature. Today, so far there are just only 19 books research on Korean literature until now, and the thesis on Korean literature are very limited. Yeah, this is the book related to Korean literature. We published under the support of AKS and LTI, 한국학중앙연구원, and 한국문학번역원. This is the list book we published through 3 years ago. We also have some special feature on Korean literature in here from 1995. Just 1, 2, 3, 4, just for a special feature of 한국 동아시아 연구소, 동아시아 연구소, and 문학 연구소. And until now, maybe about 100 articles on Korean literature to now. I think that's very, very, yeah. Compared to other field, literature research just have some success, but we have to do more about the Korean literature research so far. And now we want to share about the literature exchange event in Vietnam and in Korea, because the relationship between Korea and Vietnam is very good. So the literature exchange between two countries more and more. Recently, some Vietnam writer they received some literature award in Korea. And translator is An Kyung-hwan, translator. He's the translator of Nhật ký trong tờ, the recent diary of Ho Chi Minh. He received the Vietnam Cultural Leaders of Vietnamese government. In Korea, Korean novelist Kim Nam-il, the man in the center, and I'm sorry, the man in the left, in center, and Bang Hyun-seok, the man on the left. They organize the 베트남 사랑하는 전문 작가, the youth writer went to extend Vietnam. And every year they came to Vietnam, they came to the center of Vietnam and do some volunteer activities. And also they write some book about Vietnam. And from 2000, after the visit abounding to Korea, many Vietnamese writers such as Hieu Trinh, Anh Duc, and some Korean writers such as Kamon, you know Kamon is very famous poet in Korea, and Kim Kwang-kyo, Bang Hyun-seok, novelist, and An Kyung-hwan, translator, Ha Ji-young, translator. They came to Korea and Vietnam to attend a very a lot literature conference, and they also published some cooperation book about Vietnam and Korean literature. It's translated into Vietnamese and Korean. In our university from 2020, we cooperate with KTI. I'm sorry, LTI, 한국 문학번역원, and we open some the workshop, conference, and translation workshop, literature workshop in Ho Chi Minh City and in Hanoi. Yeah, there are some events we have. On 2013, we invited Kim Yong-ha 작가 and Nguyen Ngọc Từ 작가. In 2016, we invited Chung Yong-ju 작가 and Ho Anh-thai 작가. And the next year, we invited Hwang Sun-mi 작가, the writer of the 마당을 나온 암탉. Besides that, we every year we have the Korean literature essay contest, sponsored by the 한국 문학번역원. And we have in Hanoi, this year in Hanoi, and next year in Ho Chi Minh City. And this year the 14th time, we have this contest. There's some picture of contest. 은희경 작가. I think that I should talk about the Korean language education situation in Vietnam now, so they can you can understand more about why the Hallyu, why Korean culture and literature is strength more and more effective in Vietnam. Now in Vietnam we have 33 universities. We have educate Korean language or Korean study major, and we have 15 세종학당. You know 세종학당. And also from this year we teach Korean language from secondary school and high school. It's the first language, the first foreign language. Yeah. This is the situations we are teaching Korean language and Korean literature in university. And maybe I will talk a little bit about the Hallyu in Vietnam. Do we have time?
Yes.
Yeah, sure.
Sorry, I will go fast. The Hallyu in Vietnam is, in my opinion, Hallyu development stay in Vietnam. We can call for 4 stages. First stage first day. First day in the the late 1990, when Korean drama when broadcasting in Vietnam television, 첫사랑, 의가 형제, 뭐 별은 내 가슴에, a lot of drama in Vietnam television. And the second stay in the Hallyu Rose period from the 2000 to 2005. Now the Hallyu changed from drama to K-pop. The first generation of K-pop, and the second generation is Super Junior. And the peak of Hallyu in Vietnam, I see that from the 2006, from 2010, now the third generation of K-pop in idol in Korea, just Big Bang, yes, and Golden Girls, and Generation. And now we call Hallyu in Vietnam is Sin Hallyu, is my work. Sin Hallyu, a new Korean wave in Vietnam. I see that from 2010 to recent, Hallyu in Vietnam trends from the drama, music to the all generally of Korean culture, from the product, home shopping also, home shopping product, to Korean language, and now Korean literature. And I think that the trends in state of Hallyu in Vietnam is because of the Korea government and Vietnam government, how can I say it, the policy, because now the relationship between Korea and Vietnam is come to new state, and maybe Lajit and Professor will talk about that later. And because of the possibility of Hallyu in Vietnam also continue. So the strain about the literature, of course, of all of the Korean and Korea Vietnam literary strain. Maybe in the future we will continue with more and more activities and more events. Now we can see some cooperation between Korean and Vietnam university, from government to university to the companies, from online channel Hallyu in Vietnam. We have VLI is online channel in Hallyu, and now my student and my young people in Vietnam, they are very enjoy with this apply in their mobile. And about the Hallyu content, joint venture and investment for Hallyu in Vietnam is between the company and company. And for more is what investment for Hallyu content in Vietnam. In entertainment, you say VTV is Vietnam Pangsong, and CJ Group, they have some joint venture on remake film and joint film, yes. And they very success in the remake film and joint film recently. So the success key of Hallyu in Vietnam and Hallyu content in Vietnam, I think that's a right collaboration between the producer, actor, public relation, yes. And also because the Vietnamese and Korean culture calls, we have Chong and Hưng, and the cultural simultaneous stimulation between Vietnamese and Koreans. In some countries, and every year we have country strain events in one type in Korean and one type in Ho Chi Minh City and in Hanoi. Okay, thank you. I will speak in here, and thank you for listening. And I will answer if you want to know more about the strain between Korea and Vietnam. I will answer the question. instead for my speech. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so that was very interesting, and I think we all learned a lot about Korea's cultural influence in Vietnam. And so I'm going to turn it over to Professor Butsaban, who's already got his screen share going. So thank you.
Hi everyone. First of all, I would like to thank to all the members of GWIKS and Professor Clegg and Professor Shawn for preparing this wonderful events. And thank everyone to your time to present panel discussion today. And we hope have the fruitful discussion today. Okay. And first off, PowerPoint is the Korean Wave in Thailand. I would like to introduce Korean Wave in Thailand. The impact of Korean Wave in Thailand is huge and it is getting bigger every year. Korean Wave or Hallyu not only affect greatly on Thailand, but also it contributes to the development of Thai culture in Korean society also. And this is the table of contents, and the first is the Thailand-Korean bilateral relations. The friendship between Thailand and Korea beginning during Korean War, and the relationship between two countries had been focused more on military cooperation as Korean regard ASEAN as an important partner to work for inter-Korean peace. In economic relations, Korean investment in Thailand is largest among the 10 ASEAN countries. Trade between Korea and Thailand has also been stagnant, but due to the New Southern policy and as Korea and Thailand is the partner of ASEAN, the increase in trade is expected. And next, Thailand-Korean culture cooperations. Thailand is the center hub for Korean to export its regional soft power, and it is the largest consumer market for Korean culture. This table is summarized of New Southern policy, and thanks to New Southern policy, the culture cooperation between Thailand and Korea will be stronger. The New Southern policy is a vision promote co-prosperity to exchange the youth and civil society, such as expanding tourism, intercultural exchange of culture, languages, and content with the New Southern regions, and improving the image of ASEAN nations beyond internal and economic cooperations. The Moon government tried to normalize the forced diplomatic relation between North Korea through an exchange of culture. This is the evidence that culture exchange is the most important vision of New Southern policy as well. Many K-pop events and expos are held and visited by a lot of people at Bangkok, Thailand. You can see the picture. The event for the concert or Korean content events more bigger every year. And cultural exchange are also active among private organizations and civil society. One example is Thailand Tak Pithiyakum School visiting the Incheon Chakchon Girls High School in 2018. Students participate many culture exchange activity and understand their language and culture. And really important thing is Thailand as the Korean language as the one of second foreign language, and students can choose to test on Thai University entrance exam. As such, the role of overseas cultural centers and Korean study in university become more important. And next is Korean Wave in Thailand. As you can see on PPT, in the past, Hallyu policy from the past is one-way Hallyu, but nowadays the policy of Korean Wave is two-way Hallyu. So In the Moon Jae-in government, Hallyu policy take a different course from the past. Before the Moon Jae-in government, one way Hallyu was emphasized. This has been criticized by recipient countries and third anti-Hallyu movement. However, the Moon Jae-in government pays mutual and interactive culture exchange at the front line, rather than a unilateral expansion of Hallyu. And according to Global Hallyu Trends reports, we can see that the popularity of Hallyu in Thailand has increased every year. The perceptions of the Thai people toward Korea was very positive. People who experience Hallyu show a higher interest in Korea, such as wishing to visit Korea, hoping to experience Korean culture, and wanting to learn Korean language. The Hallyu make people try to want to know about the Korean products, and its use and future interests are higher than those of another country. The results show that Hallyu effect continue to be strong and positive, and is improved the image of Korean among Thailand Hallyu consumer. So it means Korean product consumer in Thailand nowadays is bigger than the past because of one factor is New Southern policy. And next, the popularity of K-pop and sustainability in Thailand. K-pop become leading soft power source of Korean wave. In K-pop, members of foreign nationality have been recruited for idol group. The requirements of foreign members is an essential strategy for the sustainability of K-pop. There are many Thai members in K-pop, the first and the only country in Southeast Asia. Foreign idol members not only influence in their home countries, but also they performing the role as representative who promote their home country's image and national identity. It means nowadays Thai idol K-pop is joined in Korean K-pop industry. So when the K-pop is stronger, Thai culture has been promoted also. So it's good for Thailand to seeing the past of K-pop is developed. And there are many Thai idol K-pop nowadays. As you can see the picture, Nikun, Lisa, Bam Bam, Ten, and Minnie, and so on. So there are many Thai idols in K-pop nowadays. Nikun of 2PM is the best example. He is more popular than another Korean member in his group and become a big star in Korea. Nikun attracts the attention that he is become from Thailand. He cannot imagine foreign member from developing country at that time. This shows that a Thai people can become a star in Korea, as opposed being someone who admire Korean wave star. Korean wave created Thai wave, really important for Thai government. So Thai wave is the socio-cultural elements of Thailand that can be found in Korean society. Many Thai people visited at Seoul in Korea and they transfer Thai culture in Korean society. The transnational culture movements of K-pop result Thai wave in Korea. Korean society experienced a rapid change into the multicultural society, but this change lead to creating negative perceptions on foreign accessibility Southeast Asia. And next is Korean soft power and its impact. Korean wave is one of Korean main soft power. In legal soft power theory, he stated that heroes and celebrity strategy, which explaining the huge influence celebrity have on the public. In this sense, many previous studies prove that Hallyu star influence positive on people's perceptions of Korea. And next, stereotype perceptions of Thai people in Korea. This table, I researched about the 19 Korean media, and the media has huge influence on perception of Koreans. Many Korean media reports contain contents and negative image of foreigner and multicultural family. The survey results show that Koreans have positive attitude toward people from English speaker countries, and they are offensive to people from Southeast Asia. From 2007 to 2017, I researched 19 Korean media reports on Thai people. Korean news tend to depict Thai people in the negative and sympathetic way. The original of discrimination can be found from Korean Orientalism and the advanced country discourse. Koreans create their own Orientalism. Korean Orient is Southeast Asia. That's Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, and Nepal are different countries. It's not important. There is only Southeast Asia who are clearly different from Korea. As one country discourse, Korean divides the world into as one country and undeveloped country. Korean exclusive attitude toward foreigners is not always the same. Koreans prefer foreigners from as one countries and discriminate people from underdeveloped country. And next is Thai idol in K-pop and their loans. So many effects from Thai idol in K-pop to Korean society. As many Thai celebrities in K-pop appear in TV and Korean people contact Thai people in daily life, Korean society is undergoing a big change. The best example is Lisa from Blackpink. I researched media reports on Lisa from her debut to until now and analyzed people's reactions on the blog and SNS. Some Koreans still discriminations and negative feeling toward Thailand idol in K-pop. And many fact that she is from Thailand always matter with her looks. However, her activity promote Thailand and make Koreans to take more interest in and get more know about Thailand. When she appear on Knowing Browser, or in Korean called Anin Hyongnim, the famous TV program, Lisa performed a traditional Thai dance. Korean people reaction was really positive and exciting. And they want to know more about Thailand because of Lisa effect. When Nichkhun debuted in 2008, there are many letter comments, and these comments received a lot of like from public. 10 years have passed, and such comments receive huge criticism now. And I can be an example showing how much Korean society has changed. All articles report that Lisa was a famous foreigner band such as Celine. Korean reaction was full of proud and they call her Korean Thai. And Lisa imprints a positive image in the eyes of Korean public, and it reflects Korean society in it changing. And finally is the conclusion. So Conclusion, this picture summary the Korean wave in Thailand. So the impact of Korean wave in Thailand is huge. K-pop is the leading soft power source of Korean wave. In the visions of the new Southern policy, active culture and people-to-people exchange are held in all levels. Korea and Thailand cultural operations is emphasized and bilateral expansions of Hallyu and Thailand culture. So this picture is win-win for both countries. Thai idol in K-pop has put many efforts promoting the image of Thai in Korean and become representative of Thailand and Korea at the same time. There are many Thai idol stars in K-pop and the number will grow in the future. Thai wave star can afford Korean public to break the stereotype of Thai people in Korean society. Korea is undergoing a huge change. Korean society synthesizes discriminations and self-reflect on recent comment. At the background of this change is the influence of the Thai member in the K-pop such as Nikun and Lisa. To the contributions of these K-pop idols, the perceptions of Thai people held by the Korean public have been changed, and Korean society more forward to becoming a multicultural society. In conclusion, Korean wave in Thailand takes the path of co-prosperity of two countries. Korean wave in Thailand continue to be prosperous, and Thai wave in Korea enhance understanding and interest of Thai culture and contribute the breaking the discrimination of Thai people. Okay, and thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Kamon. And now we are going to turn the floor over to our third speaker, Professor La.
First of all, thank you very much for having me today. I'm very proud to be a speaker of the talk today. As Professor Nguyen Chi Hien already talked about her effort and the effort of many Vietnamese scholars on boosting the exchanging between Korean and Vietnamese culture in the past several years. And actually, Professor Nguyen Chi Hien put a lot of effort and greatly contributed to the success of the Vietnamese and Korean literature change. And actually, I think that is very the significance of her effort is that she helped Vietnamese people to understand the heart and the talks of Korean people through Korean literature translated in Vietnam. So she did a really great presentation on that. But for my talk, I'm going to talk about few aspects of Korea's soft power in Vietnam. And my talk also focus on the significance of Hallyu, which is Korean wave in Vietnam. So this is the contents of my talk. First of all, I'm gonna talk a little bit about the definitions of Hallyu, Korean wave, how we understand and how Korean wave should be interpreted. And there was a question why Vietnamese people are very fervent, excited. Culture, especially they are the people who easily adopted Korean wave in the middle 19th century, in the middle of 1990s. And so I will talk about the history and the cultural connectedness between Vietnamese people and Korean people. And then I will briefly talk about the pre-establishment and development of Korean-Vietnam relation. And based on that foundation, I will show some kind of the images, the evidence of the Korean soft power in Vietnam, not only via dramas or films, but also the things that we can see through the significant figures of the economic achievement of Korean enterprises in Vietnam. And at the last part of my talk, I'm gonna suggest some just like my personal opinion about how Korea should put more efforts on maintaining the strength, the power of their soft power in Vietnam, and how to attract Vietnamese people to their culture in the next few years. So yeah, so like actually, according to the talk of Professor Nguyễn Chi Hiền, I can be seen as the second generation of Korean way, because when I went to undergraduate study in the University of Vietnam National University, that year was 2005, and yeah, it was the second phase of Korean way in Vietnam. So in the first phase of Korean way, there was like the introduction of Korean dramas and film into Vietnam. And the second phase is that people get more familiar with Korean culture via drama and film. They want to get more to know more about the country. So they find another means of getting to know that country. And that's what the time when K-pop, the first generation of K-pop appeared in Vietnam. And at the time when I was studying in the university, people talk a lot about globalizations, Vietnam opened in the late 1990s, and we tried to keep up with the other neighbor countries in Southeast Asia, and we were talked about globalization. So basically, globalization in our perception is like, the connectedness of people around the world, but globalization is not a global phenomenon that can guarantee equal opportunity for all participants. Means like every country wants to, step up, they want to do something, they want to gain economically in other countries. But in order to do that, a country have to put some effort in order to advertise, in order to get the image of that country to be known well to the other country. So that moved to the concept of soft power, which was introduced and developed by Joseph in the late 1980s, which easily be understood as the ability to influence the behavior of the other to get the outcomes one wants. And that's the thing that we can see in the aspect of soft power of Korea via their cultural influence in Vietnam. So according to Lee Kuan, actually Professor Kamon Butsaban also referred to the research of Lee Kuan. So Lee Kuan in his research, he talked about the Korean wave in Southeast Asia, and in what kind of methods Korean soft power should be projected to improve the image of Korean people abroad. And also Professor Ney, he argued about one of the core value, one of the core methods to push soft power of a country is to to advertise the culture of the country, so that people in the other country would understand the culture, the values, and so that but in case of Korean soft power approach, the soft power of Korea help to create a favorable environment for Korean people, because when people encounter with Korean culture, they got to understand Korean people, they become familiar with the image and this Korean standards. So I think that is the thing that Korean people after more than 10 years of Korean culture influence in Vietnam, when they come to Vietnam and they walk and they found out, wow, there's a lot of Korean stuff, and Vietnamese people feel they can share the understandings, they can feel like it's okay to do something like Korean people. And for the Korean way, according to the other studies of Korean way in the global scales, they argue, other researchers argue that the Hallyu started in firstly from China in the year 1998. Chinese media mentioned the term Hallyu to describe Chinese use certain craze for Korean popular culture products. And after that, there was a huge success of HBO concert in Beijing, and followed a few years later was the success of a Korean in the organization for the Korea World Cup in 2002. And in case of Vietnam, the Korean Way started in the late 1990s with the booming firm of medical products, which is in Korean. And in the following years, we can see like a really successful increase in the number of cremas aired on the national TV, like 14 cremas aired from 1997 to 98, and then 30 cremas in the period of 99 to 2001. And I also like look at the I do some like very real research on how Korean way soft power in Vietnam have been conducted previously. So I found like a very interesting research. I don't know if that's a girl, you know, he or she, but I use research on the role of Korean soft power in improving Korean-Asian relation. And in this research, she actually shows some statistical data to prove that there were numerous positive economic incentives and benefits for Korea when they perform soft power or they try to project soft power in Southeast Asia. And in this, according to the research, Vietnam also one of the first countries in Southeast Asia that adopted Korean way via films and dramas. In 2007, there was another research from Vietnam, and this research was submitted in a journal in Korea. And this lady actually did a survey of Vietnamese audience in Hanoi. She tried to know the perception of Vietnamese people upon the Korean values, which are conveyed through Korean dramas and films. And in one of the questions of her studies, which is on the screen, as you can see, there was like 한국 필름에서 무엇을 배우는가, which means what did you learn from Korean movies and dramas? So in the below categories of answers, there was like we can see that like there are three things we score quite high, like 불굴의 정신, and then 일에 대한 사랑, 그리고 자립. There were three things. The first one is the spirit of overcoming difficulties, overcoming despite adversity. The second one, 일에 대한 사랑, which means like the love for what you are doing, like and the third one with the highest score is 자립, which means in English should be self-reliance, which means like because you have the spirit of overcoming difficulties and you love what you're doing, so you need to have the spirit of self-reliance. So they are quite connected, and those are the Korean values that Vietnamese people perceived through Korean dramas and movie in the second phase of Korean ways from the period of 2000 to 2005. Okay. And in Vietnam, actually in our university, this research was conducted, and this was the research conducted on Korean way, but not on the entire Vietnam, but this research was narrowed down into the Vietnam southern areas. So this lady, she tried to answer the questions whether the Pacific culture of Vietnam southern areas affected the process of introduction of Korean way, and she also gave some like emphasized the positive and negative influences of Korean wave, and a lot of part of research were like giving suggestions or like suggestions for two countries to overcome the negative influence of Korean wave, which is very like interesting to know that, yeah. And in 2017, at the Academy of Korean Studies South Korea, which was the school that I did my undergraduate studies in Korea, Nguyễn Thị Cam did another research on Korean way in Vietnam. But the new thing in her research is that she went back to Vietnam, to the area that a massacre was caused by Korean dispatch army. Like she made an interview with those who suffer from the Korean soldiers at that time, and she asked them whether to get to know whether there is any changes in their attitude or their perception of Korea and Korean people, because at that time, like even though the Persians also like they have many chances to to get know more about Korea and Korean culture, and in this research we can see a very like significant positive changes of attitude toward Koreans, like even those who suffer from the dispatched Korean army during the Vietnam War. And yeah, so to answer why Vietnamese people are like excited about Korean wave, and why Vietnam is one of the earliest country in Southeast Asia which adopted Korean wave in the 1990s. I have some kind of like, it's just my explanation, but I think it could make sense. So as we can see, like in the past, Vietnam and Korea, like now as a globalization era, Vietnam and Korea is not that far, right? We still just like two countries in Asia, and it's like, by airplane, it doesn't take a lot of time to commute from Vietnam and Korea. But in the past, like Vietnam was like geographically distant from Korea, but we actually share the Confucianism values, which we learned from China, because Vietnam and Korea used to be a tributary state of many Chinese empire. So at that time of Europe, we also practiced receiving investiture from Chinese empires, and we had to pay tribute to maintain a friendly relationship with Chinese empire just like for 1,000 years. So as Professor Nguyen Thi Hien also mentioned some kind of like literature exchange between the envoy of Korea and Vietnam when they were dispatched to Beijing for their, for the diplomatic task. So there was like really a talk, but as far as I learned, like foreign envoys in Beijing during that time, they are not allowed to have any direct contact, or were not allowed to talk to each other. But so this is one of the very first meeting between a Vietnamese envoy and a Korean envoy, and they actually met each other. So they couldn't communicate in the language, but because they share the uses of using same character, so they actually interact. They just like write the sentence, and Yi Su Quang actually asked a lot about Vietnam, and through the talk with Phùng Hoc Quang, a Vietnamese envoy, Korean firstly got to know there was the existence of of a country like Vietnam, and Vietnam was a country in the Sino-centric area of China, and also via the interview between Yi Su Quang and Phùng Hoc Quang, Yi Su Quang got to know the significance of Joseon of Korea, compared to the other like tributary states to China at that time. And especially we should mention the the significance of Confucianism as a set of core values in the process of state building and social structuring, and that thing we can find in the Vietnam last dynasty, Nguyen dynasty, and Korea last dynasty, Joseon dynasty. And move to the modern time, from the early 19th century, Vietnam and Korea faced the challenge and aggression from Western country. So the two states decided to close their door in order to to protect the values of their country, and to make sure of the stability of the kingdom, right? And so finally, the closing door strategy didn't work, and the two countries fall into colonization. In case of Korea, Korea became a colony of Japan, and Vietnam became a colony of France. But after Second World War II, Korea and Vietnam share the same scenario, like sad scenario. Two countries were divided by big power of the world, and finally became the battlefield for the explosion of political ideological classes, as we know in Hanguk Chonjen, Korean War, and Vietnam Chonjen, Vietnam War. And another linkage between Vietnam and Korea is that Korea was not like didn't have a good image in Vietnamese people, because bad history of sending troops to Vietnam, and there was a massacre in like several areas in the central Vietnam. But yeah, later, thanks to Korean way, the image, the perception of Vietnam, Vietnamese people upon the Korea and Korean people changed. So we can see the power of Korean way dead in Vietnam. Yeah. Anyway, so I will briefly talk about the re-establishment of Korea and Vietnam relations. But before 1933, South Korea was a country belonged to a social capitalist bloc led by the US. So Korea had no diplomatic relation with other countries that were friendly to North Korea, and Vietnam was one of the countries which was really friendly to North Korea. So, but then after the 1933, due to the efforts of China and to ease tension between the two blocs, Korea started to have interaction with other countries of the social bloc. And in case of Vietnam, after the reunification in 1975, Vietnam also only maintained foreign relations with country of the social bloc, and at that time we focused on state planned economic development. But then moving to the 80s, after 1986 of the emergent policy, which means renovation policy, Vietnam decided to open the country and perform several economic reform up to now. So on that occasion, to 1992, Vietnam and Korea started a diplomatic formal relationship with each other. And there was like a visit of Prime Minister Võ Văn Kiệt to Korea. And later in 1996, President Kim Jong-un, who is one of the first president of Korea, visited Vietnam. So there was milestone in the relationship between the two countries. So there was like a very particular, like significant milestone of relationship between Korea and Vietnam. As I mentioned, like in 1992 was the time for re-establishment diplomatic relation between the two countries. So in the following year, 1993, Vietnam opened the embassy in Seoul, and then in November 1993, Korea opened a general consulate of Republic of Korea in Ho Chi Minh City. And in 2001, the two countries proclaimed another step of relationship between the two countries, which was in English, a comprehensive partnership of the 21st century. Yeah. And then in October 2009, the two countries claimed a deeper relationship between the two countries was the strategic partnership on the occasion of President Lee Myung-bak's visit to Vietnam. So actually, Professor Hieng talked about the development and process and other like the phase of the development of Korean West in Vietnam. So I will just really mention apart a little bit. So first was the booming of Korea. So after the introduction of Korean drama, after the re-establishment of the relationship between the two countries in 1992, so 1 year later in 1993, our university, Vietnam National University, Ho Chi Minh City, established, open the Korean study in the Faculty of Orient Studies. Also at that, and Professor Hiên also she saw the statistics of how many institutes in Vietnam which have the Korean language and the education of Korean studies. So this was like a lot of part that mentioned in Professor Hiên talk. So I would probably we can see on these photos that I found on the internet, and also so on the other people research, there was like a huge crowd of like Vietnamese K-pop fan waiting for their for big band, and then this is very like a normal scene of Vietnamese K-pop fan when they they got to know a news of K-pop, stars come to Vietnam, and there was like, they were poured into Tân Sơn Nhất International Airport, like a very international airport in Ho Chi Minh City, my city. So they wait there for a whole day, just got a glance of the star, and this is also the people argue that this is a negative side effect of Korean way, but I'm not gonna go deep into this. Okay. Yeah, so there's a lot of like since the 1990s up to now. So the Korean cultural influences is very visible in Vietnamese people daily life. And so I don't remember exactly, but at the time when I entered university in 2005, my first year in university, and at that time suddenly like people would talk about, there was a things, when people compliment each other, it was like, oh, you look like a Korean, or what a Korean style you have. Like, when they look at a person who had a style or who actually like pay some attention of their outlook. So, and up to now, like it's still the same, even though like I don't tell people that I study in Korea. I don't tell people that I know Korean language. But if I dress well, if I have a style or something, it was like, wow, good. You look like a Korean. So it's really become a thing, like, wow, really? Why not Chinese? Why not Japanese? But Korean. So Korean is thinking like, it refers to something like beautification. Or yeah, the other thing that I found out like kind of weird, but okay, it's not that bad because I studied Korean and I'm teaching Korean language too. So okay, so Professor Hin also mentioned the influence of like K-pop drama and K-beauty, the commercial behavior of Vietnamese consumer in Vietnam. So I must say that's growing significantly. Like if we go to supermarket or any like commercial district, we can see a lot of like Korean products everywhere. Especially kimchi. Kimchi was not a thing of Vietnam, but now if you go to supermarket, like not like a luxury department store or whatever, it's just like a really normal like supermarket. All Vietnamese people come to buy their food and stuff. You can see kimchi on the racks, and kimchi also became most familiar side dishes on Vietnamese dining table. And this is a significant one of Vietnamese people adoption of Korean culture. As you can see that, it might be, the same thing of Southeast Asia. Like we have a really young age population, a really young population, and Vietnamese people are really, we highly regard the value of family. And because they are young, so they really excited about getting married, making a family. So getting married is something like a thing that you have to do in your life, like to the Vietnamese people. So everything related to the preparation of wedding should be considered carefully. And so, but then there was a thing that Vietnamese people, young people, they refer to have a photo shots of their wedding in Korean Hamburg. And if you Google, you search the wedding show in Korean Hamburg in Vietnamese language in Google, there was millions of shots in only 1 second. This is very interesting. Okay. And because as a natural phenomenon, like Korean way also have the up and down period. There was a time where Vietnamese people get kind of tired of, fed up with Korean style, because up to a certain point of time, people feel like all Korean stuff are the same. Drama and Korean drama and film showing the same stuff of things. But then there was suddenly in the night from the period up to 1915, there was a success of BTS and other K-pop star, and so they they send a new energies of Korean way in Vietnam and make Vietnamese people remind there was a Korean things that we used to love, and now we keep to do it. Okay, so there was interview of a Vietnamese lady, and she was like, she will share her talk on the Korea, like K-pop, her talk about K-pop. So she said like there was, this is the English translation of this. So there was a period from late 1930 to the beginning of 2015. She like kind of like stopped listening to K-pop, right? And then suddenly she became fall in love with BTS again. So and she found, kind of like values of her life. And I think a lot of young people fall in love with BTS because of not of their like their like brilliant outlook, like fascinating outlook, but also the values that this group try to convey, try to present to the fans around the world. And especially, also Professor Nguyen Thi, he mentioned, the success of Park Hang-seo, Sang Sang-nim. Sang Sang-nim means teacher, right? Actually, he's the director of our national football team. But in Vietnam, we refer him as a teacher. So he's like a Korean teacher for a Vietnam national football team. And also, like, we adopted a term, like a terminology from Korea. In Korea, when someone is a typical person or a passionate person who obtains a certain quality as a passionate in that field, they refer that person as Kumin something. So Kumin means national. You are representative. You are passionate of your field. So Park Hang-seo did a really great job in boosting Korean Vietnamese football achievement, not only Southeast Asia but also in Asia. In 2018, we went up to the second rank in Asian Cup. Organized in China. We were the second. We got a silver medal, of that one. And then in the following year, we also made a great achievement in a football festival in Southeast Asia. But so he's not like become a really like a teacher, a Korean teacher that every Vietnamese people love. And of course, he also like became a commercial ambassador for like some Korean enterprises in Vietnam. And we can see as he's worked on the poster of Sinhan Bank, one of the biggest bank in Korea, which is When I was in Korea, I also a user of this the bank, so I got to know this quite well. Okay, so that's what a brief image of Korea and Vietnam. So what really matters is that Korea did a great achievement in investment in Vietnam. So up to now, to late 2019, there were like 9,000 enterprises in Vietnam, and they actually occupied a huge part of like cumulative value of FDI in Vietnam. If we have to compare to the historical competitor of Korea, Japan only made a 16.7% of the cumulative value of the FDI, and it's quite amazing that Korea FDI enterprises contributed 30% of Vietnam total value of export up to 2020. Yeah, that's really an amazing figure that I got to find out from like very reliable sources. Okay, and Samsung is a typical example of successful story of South Korean investor in Vietnam. So at the first time when they got the investment license in Vietnam, that value was $670 million. But then after 12 years, that license, has been increased by 26 times, making up to total 17.3 billion. And in this year, despite the spread of COVID-19, Vietnam, Korea's trade volume increased 70 billion US dollar in 2019. Because of the COVID-19, so that number was so a little slightly decreased, but it still stand at 65.1 million US dollar for the last year. And so this is really like, I think it should be seen as a great soft power in Vietnam, because Vietnam during the spread of COVID-19 pandemic, we closed the border. There was nothing like a commercial airplane from Vietnam to the other country, and or like airplane from other country to Vietnam. But Vietnam Ministry Industry and Trade managed to support to have like 10,000 current expats to Vietnam, those who really, have a specific skill for the enterprises in Vietnam. And another good news for people who study Korean language or, who do things related to Korean studies like me is that there was a decision from this year. Korean language was approved to be taught as the first foreign language from the third year, from elementary, secondary, and to the end of high school. As far as I know, that Thailand, you already did that. Korean language was taught widely and is accepted for one part of foreign language in the university foreign entrance exam. But that thing haven't been happening in Vietnam, but now it's happening. So from this year on, we will, people like us are allowed to teach it at the first foreign language. First foreign language means that there was no requirements for people who want to graduate from high school. So usually there was like English, French, Chinese, but 3 languages are accepted as the requirement for graduation from high school. The other foreign language taught in high school was like optional one. So either if you want to graduate from high school, you need to know either one of the 3 languages. But now Korea became one of them, and in the future, Korean language will become the the required foreign language in order to get into university in Vietnam. So this is very a good thing for us, and we show the significance of Korean cultural influence in Vietnam. Okay, so finally, what is the future of Vietnam and Korean culture? As Professor Kamon Butsaban said, that there was in the first stage of Korean ways, Korea tried to influence other country, but when the relationship become intimate, and when the people of the 2 countries get to know each other quite well, and they start to do business and tracing other commercial activities, there need to be a mutual understanding between the 2 countries. And there was negative impact of Korean wave in Vietnam, that people, Korean government or people who actually put a lot of effort on pushing Korean wave in Vietnam should consider, in my point of view, in my own opinion, I can see that Korean government, they pay a lot of effort to invest a lot of facility infrastructure in order to get Korean culture adapted in Vietnam. But at the same time, there was very few effort on Korean people getting to know Vietnamese. Even though Ho Chi Minh City has the largest community of Korean residents in living in Ho Chi Minh City, approximately 80,000 Korean residents living in Ho Chi Minh City right now. And so this is the biggest Korean community in Vietnam. But still, there was a lot of events and cultural events for Vietnamese people to get to know Korean culture. But what are the things for Korean people to get to know more about Vietnam? They used to live in their community, so they have their own stuff, and it's kind of like a closed community. Yeah. Okay. So yeah. Thank you for your attention. So this is the end of my talk. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much for that very detailed presentation.
For some countries, the very initial reason why many Southeast Asians were so open in a sense to Korea, here we're talking about South Korean influence and so forth, was in part because South Korea was not China and it was not actually Japan. And this is important. This is very important for some countries. A country like Vietnam, for example, the fact that it is neither Japan, neither China, which most Vietnamese have an antagonistic relationship to, or even Japan, whose history during like World War II was one of occupation as well. That baggage didn't come with South Koreans. In other parts of Southeast Asia, Thailand was not occupied by Thailand was not technically occupied by Japan during World War II, so it's a different relationship there, and I don't want to go into it. What I do want to talk about is just make a few comments about the complexity of the Korea Southeast Asia relationship, and pick up something which some of the speakers have been talking about, which is that at the beginning we were talking about a relationship in which essentially South Korea, because everyone's talking about South Korea, was exporting influence to Southeast Asia. And of course, the more interesting, in some ways, and more recent development is actually the export back to South Korea of influence from Southeast Asia. So it's become a more dynamic two-way process. And this is a complicated process, and there's some sides to it which actually strengthen the thesis that several of you have made of actually soft power, of Korean soft power. In other ways, we should be thinking through perhaps the meaning, particularly for different countries in Southeast Asia, of the Korean wave and the Korean influence. To give an example brought up by the last speaker of like, you look Korean, my assumption in part, and I'd be interested to know, is that one of the issues that comes up in actually Southeast Asia is the issue of colorism, skin color, light skin color in particular. And so in Vietnam, first time I went to Vietnam was 1989, and it's very obvious from 1989 until the present that concern sometimes with light skin color and actually looking a particular way, aesthetically looking a particular way. For example, having a nose which is more a straighter nose. There's a Korean look. Looking a certain way has become actually more important to younger people. And this can be thought of actually in positive ways. It can be thought of actually in negative ways as well. Some people in Vietnam, such as in the Mekong Delta, people who are rice farmers, are dark skinned because they work out they work in the rice fields. Same thing could be said. So the skin color issue, and not only just skin color, but aesthetic issues, how one face looks, is one of these issues which is very complicating. To give an example, for example, in Cambodia, in Phnom Penh, you can go to Korean aesthetic surgeons to have your actually face have surgery so that you look more Korean. And Cambodians don't have the lighter skin often of, say, Northern Vietnamese. They actually have, they're much darker skinned. And so the question here is whether or not that's really more a form of exporting a cultural imperialism. And I think that is something to be, perhaps worrisome. What was particularly valuable about this panel is when Professor Kamon Butsaban brought in the Thai perspective, and then we also had two Vietnamese perspectives, because I think there really is there really are slightly different, in a sense, relations to Korea in different countries. In addition to the issues I mentioned earlier, I want to go back to that one of the last points that was made actually by several of you, which is the impact of Korean investment in Southeast Asia. Korean investment in Southeast Asia has been huge. It's very important actually throughout Southeast Asia. It has actually overall contributed to the development of Southeast Asia. It's also a good market for Korean goods as well. But this early, in a sense, some of the early economic, in a sense, attempts of Koreans in Southeast Asia, it wasn't always, it didn't always go well. I mean, to give an example, when I was first in Vietnam and Korean companies were coming in, there often were tensions because Korean factory managers often were actually could be quite harsh towards Vietnamese workers, and Vietnamese were not actually used to, in a sense, this such a harsh labor regime. And over time, clearly, these labor practices exported from South Korea actually changed because South Koreans realized that you needed to essentially deal with the workers you have in a particular country, and they were not like South Koreans. And so over time, some of those issues actually worked out. The same thing was true of the issue in Vietnam, in particular, of the role during the Vietnam War of South Korean troops, who again had a very negative sort of like impact on certain parts of Vietnam. Not as great as the Americans. The Americans had by far a greater negative impact in that sense. But in certain parts of Vietnam, the South Koreans actually had a very negative reputation. And over time, that particular memory has attenuated. And that's not something that you're going to see in a place like Thailand, where the war was not fought on the ground, so much. And so over time, this economic relationship has tended to work out better, but there have been glitches there and that have affected relations. I mean, for example, in the Vietnamese case, the POSCO Steel, there was a big environmental catastrophe related to a POSCO Steel factory in Vietnam, which caused all sorts of uproar actually at one point. And that went away. But nonetheless, overall, the impact has actually been quite positive. So once again, I think in many ways, if you have to, this is the kind of talk where if you had to zero in on particular countries, you're actually going to see sometimes some significant differences in the depth and extent of appropriation of Korean culture. But I think it's nonetheless true that in terms of soft power, South Korea has actually done very well in terms of exporting its things. In terms of one of the questions a person's asked, and then I'll stop after this, yes, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea has had relations with actually the countries of Southeast Asia. And these have also been very particular in certain ways. Many of you may not remember that actually the Democratic People's Republic of Korea tried to blow up the South Korean Prime Minister in Myanmar when he was visiting Myanmar, and effectively did manage to kill some people during his visit. But this has often been mostly forgotten. But this wasn't; these are indeed some of the things that happened during in that particular country. There are also other cases where the Democratic People of Korea actually had a very positive, in a sense, image. In Vietnam, I'll remind some people listening that fighter pilots from actually North Korea fought in the Vietnam War, were shot down, and actually were buried actually in northern Vietnam. And their bodies, I think, were eventually repatriated, I think in 2007 or something like that. So that particular relationship, I mean, Vietnam, for example, had a relationship with initially only with Democratic People's Republic of Korea, and it had a strong and tight relationship. That relationship over time has frayed in certain ways as Vietnam has turned towards South Korea. But nonetheless, we shouldn't forget it, and we shouldn't forget this relationship is obvious in other places like Cambodia, for example, where and in other countries of Southeast Asia, that particular rivalry used to exist quite a bit, and over time, what has happened is clearly is that the Republic of Korea has tended to become much more dominant overall in the economic life and the soft power life of the region, and therefore pushed, in a sense, the DPRK off to the side. I'll stop there because I'm sure there's some questions which people want to have answered, and I'll let Greg Brzezinski actually and others pick up the questions or ask the speakers the questions.
All right. Well, thank you very, very much for that, Shawn. That was extremely interesting. And we are going to go to Q&A. We already have a number of questions in the Q&A box. I will continue to look through the box for any new questions that emerge. And, you know, I'm going to sort of pick a couple. But, you know, while I still have most of the audience here, I just want to make one other small point about the Elliott School. You can see we have a very robust Korean studies program here and a lot of great Korea-related events such as this one, and a very strong faculty for Korean studies. And I see there's so many of you in different parts of the world tonight. If you know of anyone or are yourself thinking of doing a policy-oriented master's degree in Asian studies or Korean studies, I hope you will look at and consider the Elliott School. So let me just move on from that brief self-promotion. And you know, I am the director of our Asian Studies MA program, so feel free to contact me. We actually have a few questions. Eric Paolo Capistrano has asked a number of questions in the chat box over the course of the evening. And so I actually am going to pick a couple of his questions. First of all, he asks for Professor Kamon Butsaban. He asks a couple of things, but I'm just going to pick out his second question. What can the rest of Southeast Asia learn from the Thai experience of consuming Hallyu content and developing cultural exchanges? So that's one of his questions. Another question that he asks goes to Professor La, and I want, you know, I hope you can answer this question as well. He says that regarding the themes, values portrayed and communicated by Korean movies and their appeal in Vietnamese audiences, these themes and values are not unique to Korean content. What makes the Korean content more powerfully resonating to Vietnamese audiences? And I would just add one other dimension of that. You know, one of the things you had highlighted was that there's a shared Confucian cultural element, right? But the US, there's no Confucian influence as far as I can tell. Yet, you know, these same dramas are extremely popular, not only among people like myself, but also, you know, I'm finding my colleagues who specialize in like US diplomatic history and, you know, some of them work on like Latin America. They're also into the same K-drama I'm watching. So, you know, I wonder if you might speak to that a little bit. Let's start with Professor Butsaban.
Okay, thank you so much. And thank you for Mr. Eric for your question. And your question really important because of the now many research starting to research about the Korean wave effect to the Thai customer. So really unique about the Thai customer because one thing is important is the Thai people skin not same with the Western people skin, but in case of Korea we really similar because of as the Professor Chan said that we have the yellow skin really same with the Korea or similar. So at your question, the Mr. Eric question is how Korean learns about the Thai fan customer. So in case of the influence of Thai K-pop star in Thailand really big, and they become a means of model of Korean products, which make Thai customer to buy. For example, Lisa Blackpink, she become a symbol of beauty in Korean. Why? Because Lisa is Thai and she have a lot of Thai fan club, and Thai Asia believe that if they use Korean cosmetic, what which band have Lisa presenter, so they will become one like Lisa. This can be explained by friendship, but the influence of Thai idol of K-pop is huge. As I said in the presentation, soft power theory, heroes, and celebrity from the Professor Egan theory, K-pop star influence on public perception and nation image is big. Therefore, this will be continued and Hallyu sustainability depend on sustainability of K-pop nowadays, I think. Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, Professor La.
Okay, that was a very interesting question to me because yes, in my presentation I emphasize the similarity in our share of Confucian values during the course of our historic development in Korea and Vietnam. But that was a part of appeal of Korean cultural stuff to Vietnamese people. But as you said, like people around the world actually enjoys watching or Korean dramas and Korean culture stuff. So I think apart from that, when I mentioned Confucianism in the cultural background foundation of our two countries, there was so certain concept that Vietnamese people find familiar and easy to accept, like respect the elders, highly regard the value of families. But anyway, that's also the universal things around the world, like people easily accept those things, those concepts. I think everyone love to enjoy the beauties. Everyone love to look at the good side of things. So I think for Vietnamese people, we actually went through Japanese wave. There was another thing like that, yeah. But there was before Korean wave came, we did enjoy Japanese cultural stuff and Chinese cultural stuff. And there was a time when dramas and movies from Hong Kong, occupied the market of Vietnam. But after that, the Korean wave was a huge success, and then Korean wave become cultural stuff became kind of replacement of Japanese cultural stuff. So what is the significant, what behind the success of Korean wave in Vietnam? I think not only because Japanese movie and stuff also show some certain values of Confucianism in it, but then we share. I think when Vietnamese people say look at Korea, they think about a case of national success of economic building. Like Korea set up a lot of historical scenarios in the modern times. We became a colony of foreign countries. We became divided country. We had a war in Vietnam, in our countries. But then after that, of course, there was many other factors that Vietnam, Korea, went through a different path of national development. But Vietnamese people, when they look at Korea and they say, wow, that is really a country that, share a lot of similarity in the course of history like us. And they did a very good in modern time. They became top countries in Asia. And we share the kind of we have the cultural and historical connections with them. And we also share a fate of a country in the modern time. So we should be able to do something, like that. So the certain values of, conveyed in Korean dramas, movie, and Korean culture stuff become, easily accepted by Vietnamese people. About that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor La. And I have another couple of questions. Mike Goodman has asked a few questions over the course of the evening as well, and I fear we're not going to be able to answer all of them, but I do thank you, Mike. Well, let me just pick a couple of them. First, Professor Nguyen, when you were speaking, you talked about something called the loss of Vietnam. And so Mike wanted to know if you could explain a little bit more what you meant by the loss of Vietnam. And then later on, I guess this is a question that, Professor Nguyen and Professor La, you might both speak to a little bit. He also asked about the South Korean troops who fought in Vietnam. And he said they had a reputation for being particularly tough soldiers. Did that fact result in any resentment by the Vietnamese toward Koreans? So let me turn first to Professor Nguyen.
Okay, thank you for the other question. About the question, how about the loss of Vietnam? As I explained, The Loss of Vietnam is the book written by the leading Phan Bội Châu. Yes, Phan Bội Châu is the leading of Vietnamese anti-colonial of the early 20th century of Vietnam. At that time, Vietnam is under the rule of France. So Phan Bội Châu is he left Vietnam to Japan, and in Japan he wrote a book, the history of lost Vietnam. This means the failure of Vietnam in Vietnam, the Nguyen dynasty at that time. So he wrote that the book to share the comments of the Vietnamese people with Chinese people and also the chosen people about the rule of colonism. Yes. And I'm sorry, the second question.
The second one was about the South Korean troops. And again, yes.
How about the Vietnam War? I think that last written professor this book, he researched a lot of paper about this field, so maybe he will answer for me about this issue.
Okay. Okay. Actually, yeah. Thank you very much for Anyway, the question is very interesting because in my talk I also mentioned there was a research in 2017 of actually my Hubert, kind of like my friend, Vietnamese friend in Korea who studied with me in the same university, and she actually did the research on that. Like she went to the area, actually the central area in Vietnam. She conducted interview and survey on those in the area that the massacre happened, caught by Korean people. There was actually I think there was a thing in Vietnamese people talk like, probably because we've been through many difficulties, we suffer a lot. So even though those who suffer, who were damaged or by Korean army during the Vietnam War, they said they cannot forget those things. It's not easy to forget it. But then they believe that Korea is doing well. And in the interview that I read in that research, like that they are doing well, and they actually did something to repay Vietnam for what they're doing in Vietnam. So we shouldn't just look at the past. We have to look at the future, and they also look for the better relationship or cooperation. But still in those areas we can see kind of like historical memorial, like in the areas people they build kind of like a stone like this, and telling the stories like what happened at that certain time of the massacre caused by Korean people, how many people died, what they did to the people here, in order to remember the history of that time, the things that happened at that time. So as I said, and there wasn't in the research, there was a lady, a very old lady, said we need to learn from history. So but when I was really young, when I was in high school, Korea was not anything, like we didn't got to know a lot about Korea. So when in the history course I study about we studied the success of Korean in the textbook, but was really a tiny part of the textbook. And they say like this country did that and did that to Vietnam, and that was all. Even though they are successful right now, but they did that to Vietnam. And so at that time, when people have kind of like stereotype about the outlook, the outlook appearance of Korean people. They say like, you know, that kind of person who has a pointed, you know, kind of like a typical eyes, like Korean. They mention that Korean eyes refer to, you know, to evil. So that's what I learned when I was, you know, really young. I'm like, really? But at the time, I had no idea where Korea is, what Korea, and what it did. But then, yeah. So I think there were the big changes of the attitudes of Vietnamese people toward Korean, you know, culture and Korea in general.
Okay, thank you very much. And I guess there's a few questions, and you know, for those of you whose questions we're not going to quite get to, I do apologize, but we have about 7 more minutes. So I want to take this one question though from MJ, and this is sort of addressed to all 3 of the panelists. So, you know, maybe you might all talk about this for a minute or 2 before we end. But MJ asks, we talked a lot about what we like about Korea, but I would also like to ask the panelists to comment on what Korea must improve or shift in their direction, whether it's in education, politics, entertainment, or other things. So whoever wants to start on that is, you know, that's fine with me.
Okay, thank you. So thank you for each question. So the Korean study in Thailand and about the Korean study policy in Thailand. So really important also. Why? Because of K-pop or K-drama really famous in Thailand. So younger person would like to learn Korean about want to see Korean music or K-drama or K-movie. So in Thailand, many universities teach Korean language as the major, such as my university, Chulalongkorn University, also provide Korean language major. Due to the New Southern policy, the importance of Korean language education has increased, and people can learn Korean language and culture from Korean Study Center or Korean Education Center or Korean Culture Center or the King Sejong Institute as on. And on of this center, we can learn for free or really cheap price of the course. So, however, at the same time, the problem exists is compared to the increased number of students, we did not have Korean studies scholar or instructors. So we are developing the textbook for Thai learner, but still. So we are far behind than Chinese or Japanese language education. The large budget is also a big problem. We cannot require instructor host many events and grant scholarship to students. We are fully depends on Korean government funding. The demand for Korean study language is getting bigger, but at the same time, we have many difficulty to overcome to promote Korean study in Thailand. So we have many big fans for the K-pop idol, big fan for K-drama, big fan for K-movie, but after they have New Southern policy, most of private sector, such as Korean firms such as Samsung, LG, they prepare to move to investing to Vietnam. So we increase about the Korean language student, but after that we don't have the job. So really big problem also. But in case of Chinese or Japanese language, they also have the fan club. But after they study language, they also have career job in Thailand. So I would like to hope about the wishing we can have the more Korean career job, or Thai person after learn about the Korean language can move to Korea for make the career jobs as well. So really important also about the after learn Korean language and they can get the Korean job or not. Okay, so Thank you for your question.
Thank you. Professor Nguyen.
Yes, thank you for MJ question. About your question, I can say that in terms of education in Vietnam, as Professor Lazarus said that, now we have 33 university we are teaching Korean language, and we have a department of Korean language education and Korean study education, and also we have Sejong Hak Tang, who teach Korean language for several people, and from this year we select Korean language as the first foreign language in secondary school and high school. So as the Moon Jae-in President New Southern Policy, we call Sin Nam Bang 정책. So now Korean government and Vietnam government, they have a very tight relationship. And in education, in the future, maybe the Korean government, they will send more teacher, more Korean language and Korean language teacher for Vietnam high school and secondary school in the future, in the soon future. And in terms of entertainment, also as Professor Lajitan he mentioned, now Vietnam, the cultural content market in Vietnam is very good for Korean enterprise. So Korean enterprise say CJ, Lotte, yes, they invest in Vietnam, and Vietnam governments, they have a lot of policy to adjust the investment, and maybe in the future the investment of Korean enterprise in Vietnam content markets more and more developed. Yes.
Thank you so much. And Professor La.
Oh, yeah. This is very interesting questions that we have to consider too. Like there was like few issues, looking at the negative side effect of Korean culture in Vietnam. As Professor Shawn McHale mentioned, like in the Mekong Delta of the southern Vietnam provinces, there was an increased number of, young lady in that area went to Korea or like looked for, more chances to get married to Korean men. So I think at the first stage of our Vietnam and Korea relations, when that happened, like Korean society and Vietnamese society, like in the post side, we didn't really have like enough preparation, for that certain social phenomenon, and there was a lot of like sad story happened between Vietnamese woman with a Korean man, but in the later they have some kind of like organizations like GNO who help, who went to those areas to help Vietnamese people, and also there was like GNO organization in Korea, to have those families with the so-called like international marriage, like in Korean it's like something, yeah. But I think they must do more to increase the recognition and the real image, how like not only because like via Korean War they show a lot of things, really like a beautification of Korean culture, which is good, yeah, but then there was too much of that, so that made Vietnamese people get a wrong, really not kind of wrong, but like more than they think they more they expected. So I think there should be like a real cultural change between the two countries, yeah, in terms of education or in terms of like entertainment. But then for Korean way, I can see that like Professor Butsaban also mentioned like, the success of Nikun and Lisa in the Korean idol group. But there was actually like when people say, oh, they are Thai, so like, okay, they're Thai, but they're so Koreanized. So could it be, there should it be like any kind of like globalization of Korean way, when Korean way, accepted people and, more generous about, the identities of the people who involved in the Korean way. Like for Vietnam, we don't have any, I don't know, probably we don't have, right, Professor Hing, like any singer or like idol star who can, get to become a member of a K-pop group or K-pop star. But if there should be, I think, I'm afraid that, that person really have to change a lot, in order to look Korean. So it's like Korean way, decide the Korean, but only Korean. And I was hope like, there was like more involvement for, people around the world to in terms of like the development Korean way, and other like issue like, kind of like racism about, the concern about skin, skin tones, or like how to get a job in, the difficulties to get a job in Korea. I spent a lot of like a few years in Korea, and I got to know, like the visa problem with like foreign laborers in Korea. It's a lot of stuff. I think I don't know like probably that might be the things, Korean way around the world can help to improve. Just my hope.
Okay, well, thank you so much. That's going to conclude tonight's program. Let me once again thank all of our panelists and our commentator. I thought all of you did really excellent jobs and just very, very fascinating presentations from a perspective that we don't get very often. So thank you all again. And, for those attendees who are hanging out, I want to thank you. It's, especially if you're in the US and you're up till 11 p.m. watching this, I want to thank you all for attending very much. So again, thank you.